Okay, so before we start chapter 2, so we're going to have a preface, a little crash course in Kabbalistic cosmology. So let's start with the Ten Sefirot. So it's good to just familiarize ourselves a little bit with this, with what the Sefirot are, and okay. So just in general, as we go through these various concepts, we're really going through them very superficially today. Just some general thoughts about them. But the topic comes up throughout Tanya, throughout Hasidic teachings. These concepts are ever present, and there are always new insights that we get into them. With regard to the Ten Sefirot in particular, there's actually a section in the what's called the Geret HaKodesh, the section of Tanya that's called the Holy Epistle, the Holy Letter, which is a collection of letters by the Alter Rebbe that he sent to the Hasidim. So there's this one letter that he explains the Ten Sefirot in a more thorough way. Pardon me. So, but in general, we the reason why I'm giving this preface here is because some of this comes into chapter 2, and it will come up in chapter 3, and will come up in the later chapters. So we'll always be able to come back to this, but at least we should have some kind of general overview of what it is that we're talking about. Okay, so when we talk about the Ten Sefirot, you can start with the Proto-Sefira, which is Keter. I call it a Proto-Sefira because there's a rule that when Keter is counted as a Sefira, then Da'at is not counted as a Sefira. So in Chabad, the Sefirot generally do not start from Keter, they start from Chochmah, which we'll talk about in a moment. So that's why Keter is the proto-Sefira. It's a kind of Sefira, but not quite. So it's a transcendent level, and that's why, in one way of thinking about it, it would not be considered a Sefira. And this further subdivides into two levels of Keter: the Pnimiyut HaKeter, the inner level of Keter, which is called Atik or Atik Yomin. There's actually a reference to this in the book of Daniel, the Ancient of Days. It's a reference to God, but this is a particular reference, right? Atik, and the word Atik also is related to the term something that's removed, like natak, something that is removed, and it correlates with the idea of pleasure. Okay, like the faculty of pleasure. We're talking about God, so we're talking. The principle is, as the Baal Shem Tov taught, that one must know how to divest the concepts from their physical connotations. So when we're talking about God, we have to be careful to understand that we're not suggesting that, for example, God has pleasure in the same way that we have pleasure. That is more of a metaphor in that sense. In other words, not that God doesn't have pleasure, but that our conception of pleasure that we use in order to understand God is only a metaphor. It's only a comparison, but it doesn't actually describe what pleasure means for God. But we're going to go with it for the purposes of this conversation now, will be times in Tanya where this will become more of a direct subject that we'll discuss more thoroughly and more comprehensively. And then there's a second level of Keter, which is Chitzoniyut HaKeter, the outer dimension of Keter, which is called Arich Anpin, which literally means the large or the long visage, the face. It's actually similar to the term that we use for God, Erech HaPayim, which means slow to anger. But it's not, when we talk about Keter, it's not quite what we mean when we say Archam, but I think a better way of understanding what it means in the context of Keter is that it's the faces of the Sefirot in large form. In other words, all of the Sefirot exist over there, so it's not completely removed, like Atik is removed from the lower dimensions and the concept of descriptions. Arach includes those, but in an enlarged form. In other words, in a much more essential way, and not as limited as they are within the Sefirot. This correlates, generally speaking, to the idea of will. Will and pleasure are like two sides of one coin, but will is considered like the outer dimension, while pleasure is the inner dimension. So, in a sense, that which a person has pleasure from, they want that which will lead to their pleasure. That's one way of thinking about it. The Alter Rebbe actually raises this idea later in Tanya. Okay. Now to the Sefirot themselves. So on this slide, we'll see three of the Sefirot, which are essentially the intellectual Sefirot, and then on the next slide, we'll get to the lower seven. So Chokhmah, generally translated as wisdom. A better or more accurate, more precise translation would be conception, the concept, innovation, right? Coming up with an idea, the flash of inspiration is Chokhmah. So the second one is Bina, which is generally translated as understanding. Again, a more precise translation would be comprehension. So if you have the conception, if you have the flash of the idea in Chokhmah, then Bina is like digesting that idea or development. Like thinking it through and figuring out all of its applications, all of its consequences, all of its corollaries. So that is the level of Bina. And then the third one is Dat, which is usually translated as knowledge, but again means more like focused concentration and realization. In other words, it's not about knowing information, but actually Dat is about really knowing. It's about realizing. It's about it's both. It's both the concentration, because in order to get to that realization, you have to focus, and then reaching sometimes the expression is in the from the Rebbe's is recognition and sensing, to really like when you say, do you know so and so, right? So we're not just saying, have you seen that name on the internet or something. It means, do you know them? Like, have you actually met? Do you have some kind of personal, direct knowledge of them? Or even more so, as the Alter Rebbe is going to cite a little later, the Torah says that Adam knew Eve, which doesn't just mean that he knew her, but it means that they were intimate. So that's really the connotation of that. So the words that the wisdom, understanding, knowledge that I used to translate them, I just put there because they are the common ways that these terms are translated, but they have a more special meaning in Tanya. So if you look like these, these terms come up in the Talmud and other places, and there are all kinds of explanations that are given for what exactly each one is. The other week we had we had in the Torah portion of Yitro, right, where Yitro was advising Moshe about choosing people to serve as judges. So he said, choose for yourselves anashim chachamim unvonim, men that are chachamim, they have chokhmah, and nevonim, they have binah. And what does that mean? So so Rashi explains that I think chachamim means that he learns it on his own, and nevonim is that he understands one thing from another. Like he describes these faculties a little bit differently. It's not necessarily a contradiction, but he describes it a little bit differently in the way that it's used in Chassidut in Chabad. So that's why I'm putting both here. I'm putting the usual way that these words are translated together with some terms that help us understand what they mean in the context of the Alter Rebbe's thought. Okay, let's go through to the Ten Sefirot continued. So then this would really be number 4, but slide started counting again from 1, which is fine because it's in one scheme. This is 1. So then we have Chesed, which is benevolence, which correlates with giving and love. Okay, we usually understand that, right? But and then there's Gvura. Gvura is like the counterpart to Chesed. So it's literally it's strength, but it represents harshness, severity, and judgment. So judgment comes from this aspect, from this attribute, as well as judgment can mean a number of things, right? It can mean discernment. It can also mean actually meting out justice. It can mean punishment. It can mean so there is a concept of what the Kabbalists refer to as gevurot kashot, harsh gevurot, that can result in in violence or tragedy happening in the world. So if chesed is giving, is expression and output, Fura is withholding and creating limitations. The third one is Tiferet. Tiferet literally means beauty, but in the scheme of the Sefirot, it can be thought of as harmony. In other words, you have Chesed, you have Fura, so Tiferet is a kind of synthesis of the two. If we think in the sense of compassion, right? So love can be blind, right? So it's possible for love to drive a person to give even to somebody that is not deserving. Gvura, on the other hand, right, judgment would be very judgmental, would be very strict about who is worthy and how much, right? And then would only allow for everybody getting what they deserve. Compassion is a kind of open-eyed love, right? It's saying we recognize that a person may not be worthy, but compassion. We can be more compassionate and still whatever, give the benefit of the doubt or give even But yeah, so it's a kind of synthesis, kind of harmony between Chesed and Gefura. Okay, number 4 is Netzach. Netzach can be translated as victory, can also be translated as perseverance, right? Because and eternity, and I think those 3 go together. Eternity, right? Eternity is called Netzach, right? Like Netzach means forever, and victory is a result of perseverance, and perseverance is where you continue always, even when it's tough. Number 5 is Hod. Hod is literally translated as glory, but it has again Chabad thought it's correlated very much with the the concepts of humility, effacement, submission. It's related to the word hoda'ah, which is thankful acknowledgement. Right? We say modim anachnu lach. We say in the prayers, we are thankful to you. What is thanks? Thanks essentially is a person humbling themselves and saying, you did something for me, right? You extended yourself. I didn't have it coming. I couldn't have demanded it of you, right? If it had only been what I deserved, then I wouldn't necessarily owe you thanks. But I owe you thanks when you do for me more than that. So there is a sense of humility. Oh, okay. So let me actually I'll back up a little bit to go back to the previous slide. These three as attributes of God is based on a verse I believe in Proverbs, that says, "B'chachma yibne bayit," through wisdom he builds a house. I think it's ubitfuna yitkonen or something like that. It's established through understanding. V'dat chadarim yimalu, and through knowledge, the rooms are filled with all kinds of treasures. Right, so that is actually used in the Talmud to talk about the 10 things with which God created the world. So the Talmud doesn't speak about Sefirot, but that is a Talmudic in Tractate Chagiga. That's a Talmudic source for the concept of 10 Sefirot. It talks about 10 things with which the world was created, and it begins with Chachma, Bina, and Dat, based on that verse. So likewise, these Sefirot, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, as well as the next two also, but these are explicit. This is from a verse in the book of Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles, that says, L'cha Hashem, to you, O God, belongs Hagdulah, greatness, which correlates to Chesed, the Hagvura, the might, Tiferet, and the beauty, the Netzach, and the victory, the Hod, and the glory. And then it goes on to say, Kichol v'ashamayim v'aretz, for everything that is in heaven and on earth is yours. L'cha Hashem hamamlacha. To you, God, belongs sovereignty. So those are the next two, which is Yesod and Malchut. So Yesod literally means foundation, but it has the personality, the characteristic of Yesod is desire and connection, and Malchut is sovereignty, which is related to reception, to receiving. It's the feminine aspect, and it correlates with the idea of speech. Well, in the next slide, we're going to talk about 10 Sefirot in the body. So the attributes of Chesed and Yesod are not, those words are not used in that verse. There are other words that are used, Gedulah instead of Chesed, which according to many Kabbalists use the term Gedulah instead of Chesed as well, greatness. But it's the same concept. And then Yesod is Kichol v'ashamayim v'aretz, for all that is in heaven and on earth is yours. So Yesod is considered the unifier of heaven and earth. So the upper six would be considered heaven, and Malchut would be considered earth. The Yesod is the one that makes the connection, the bridge between them. So I want to mention again, because I forgot to put this down, that each one of these consists of all the others. In other words, within Chesed, there's Chesed, there's Gvura, there's Tiferet, there's Netzach. This is a psychological structure. Each part is a complete entity, and one way of thinking about this is as a body, even though it's not literally the body, but it can be described as a body. It's a way of thinking of it as a system. right? The body is a system, and each part complements the other, and each part is only complete when the other parts are there as well. So it's not just, and they're structured in a particular way, right? So it's not just 10, random attributes that sometimes God acts with this attribute and sometimes God acts with that attribute, but essentially they all work together to bring about creation. And the metaphor of a body is a very good metaphor for this, because number one, in the body, each part needs all the other parts, and also they have to be in the right place. Right? It's not just that you need to have a head and you need to have a foot, but the head is in its place and the foot is in its place. It wouldn't do to have them otherwise. So the human body is in the pattern that it needs to be in order for to sync up with the soul, and the soul is in that pattern because it comes from God and it's an image of God. So that So as I said over there, it's out of order, but I put it into the order of the Sefirot. So yeah, Keter correlates to the skull where the tefillin are placed. Chochmah is the brain and the thought. Bina is the heart. Chesed is the right arm. Kevurah is the left arm. Tiferet is the torso. Netzach is the right thigh. Hod is the left thigh. Okay. Yesod is a sign of the Holy Covenant, the Brit. Right? It says it's the end of the torso. And then Malchut, it says, is the mouth. It relates to the Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral Torah. That's how it's described in the in that passage in the Zohar. One idea that I think is being expressed over here is relating to this concept of God having, I'm actually being described at times having the feet and so forth. That Kabbalistically, this is a reference to specific sefirot, and that's why God is being described that way. So in Kabbalah, everything comes back to the sefirot. If you have a verse in the Torah, it will be alluding to various sefirot. Where it's starting now the Torah portion of Truma, and Truma talks about the building of the tabernacle. You start talking about the tabernacle, Kabbalistically, this part of the tabernacle corresponds to this sefira, and this part of the tabernacle corresponds to that sefira. You're talking about you have the ark, you have the menorah, you have the table. They correspond to different sefirot or different amalgamations of sefirot. That is not mentioned in that passage. And again, because when Keter is counted, that was not counted. The explanation for that is a pretty esoteric explanation, and it's I don't know if it's if we need to get into it now. It's not really discussed that much, I think, in Tanya. I don't think, but it's found in other Chabad writings. There are two levels of dots. It depends which level we're counting. So I think the higher level of dots is connected to Keter, and therefore it doesn't count as its own sefirah. The lower level is, anyways. It's not. I don't think it really comes up in that particular question. I don't think it really comes up in Tanya. I may be wrong. I'm not I don't know the whole Tanya by heart, but from what I can remember, Bina is associated with the heart. We think of it as an intellectual aspect, and the reason for that is because the heart is also considered a place of understanding, not only the brain. This is, I think this. I find this in the Torah. The Torah talks about having a lev ladat, having a heart to know. And it's, find it in Talmud also. So, Actually, what it says there is that Bina is the heart, and with it the heart understands. So even though we usually associate the emotions with the heart, there is an aspect that's related to the heart. Maybe it has more to do with the idea that Bina creates the possibility for emotions. That the full comprehension of a thought is what allows for it to develop into emotions. So it's kind of an opening, at least, a beginning of the function of the heart. You can find this diagram here in all kinds of different forms, on the internet if you look for it. This was one. I thought it was pretty clear and colorful, so I put it up. I'm not sure if they made the colors specifically correlate with, maybe they did. Yeah. I don't know. But what you can see here is that there is it's got a rough kind of human shape where you have like a head at the top, you have arms at the side, and you have the middle. So the Sefirot are divided then into three lines, three columns. The right column is Chacham, is Chochmah, Chesed, Netzach. The left is Baga, Bina, Gvura, Hod. And then the middle is Dati, Dat, Tiferet, Yisod. And then beneath them is Malchut, which is the receptive vessel. All of the energies from the higher Sefirot are then passed on to Malchut, and then Malchut is where creation happens. Another way of divvying up the Sefirot is kind of into three triangles, three segels. We have Chabad, Chochmah, Bina, Dat, which is the intellectual Sefirot. We have Chagat, which is Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, which are the basic emotions, right? The primary emotions. You think of the primary colors, right? The primary emotions, and then the Hi, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, are applied emotions. So they're not straight emotions. The emotions way that they lead to action. Not action yet, but it is the between the emotions and the results of the emotions, there is a kind of a second stage, a second phase in the emotions represented by the lower three. Netzach, Hod, Yisod. Incidentally, that's where prophecy is said to come from. Okay. Now that we're experts on the 10 Sefirot, there is another division of these Sefirot, and remember again that each one consists of all the others, and this is especially important when we start talking about Partzufim. I translated this as configurations. I'm not sure that's the best translation. In modern Hebrew, Partzuf is like the face, right? The person's facial features is there. Partzuf. Yeah, I haven't really looked into like where this term comes from, but it's used by the Arizal and other Kabbalists. And basically, what it means is that if we take these 10 Sefirot, we can divide them into, I think, basically four different like sets. So it works like this. The first one is called Abba. Abba means father, and that is associated with the Sefirah of Chochmah and the letter Yud of God's name. So, but when we talk about Chochmah as a Partzuf, we're not just talking about Chochmah itself, we're talking about Chochmah as the entire world of Chochmah, like all the 10 Sefirot, as they are within Chochmah. Chochmah of Chochmah, Bina of Chochmah, Da'at of Chochmah, Chesed of Chochmah, Gvura of Chochmah, and so on. The second Partzuf is Ima, mother, which is associated with Bina and the letter Hey of God's name. The third Partzuf is called Ze'er Anpin. So you remember before we had Arich Anpin, which is the large visage. This is the small visage. So these are the Sefirot of Chesed through Yisod. and they correlate to the letter Vav of God's name. Actually, 6 Sefirot in this part. This is considered the masculine to the feminine of the Nukva, which is Malchut. So Nukva literally means female, and that's Malchut, and that's the final Hey of God's name. In this layout, we actually have two male aspects and 2 female aspects, right? Because the letters Hey, there's the upper Hey and the lower Hey. And they're both feminine. One is mother and one is daughter. And then you have father and son. Okay. So all of this is going to play into the system of the 4 worlds. So the Zohar and the Kabbalists talk in general terms of 4 worlds. It's possible to think of more than four because there is a concept of the worlds of Ein Sof, kind of an infinity of worlds that is beyond, but they're not worlds in the same way that the 4 worlds are. So what makes something a world deserves discussion as well. I think, at least in parts, the worlds are defined by the 10 Sefirot. So just like we talk about 4 worlds, when we talk about 10 Sefirot, there's a possibility of an infinite number of Sefirot. The 10 are the operating system within the 4 worlds. Okay, so there are many concepts. There's a concept of Tzimtzum, of the divine contraction that created the space for the worlds. So before everything, we can talk about Ein Sof. We can talk about that which is without end. That can be a reference to God Himself, the infinite one. We also talk about the light of the Ein Sof, which can either mean the light of the infinite or the light that is infinite, or Ein Sof. And then the first world is the world called Atzilut. Atzilut is usually translated as emanation. The concept of emanation is that it's a revelation of what was already concealed, meaning that it is not something new. So the next world is going to be creation. Creation means creating something new, creating something that didn't exist beforehand. Atzilut is not a new creation. It's just revealing that which is already there before. The word Atzilut can be related to the word Eitzel, which means near. It can be related to the word Atzil, which means nobility. It can also be related to the word Hatzalah, not Hatzalah as in rescue, but Hatzalah with the Aleph. Like it says that God told Moshe to gather 70 elders and Atzalti, and I will remove some of the spirit from you and put it on them. Right. So in a sense, it's kind of an emanation from Moshe that is then transferred to the 70 elders. So separation, not in the sense of being separate, but in the sense of a chip off the old block, right? It's like a piece or a
redistribution.
A transfer of what was there before. And in this world, He and His attributes are one. In other words, this is a world of pure divinity, of pure godliness, and this is in distinction to the lower worlds, which are the worlds of Bria. Bria literally means creation. Creation, Nachmanides emphasizes, means ex nihilo, out of nothing, yesh me'ayin, something out of nothing. So, which means that this is the first level at which there's something that we can call yesh, something that is. In other words, something that's distinct from the creator. Whatever was before is all creator. It's not its own entity. It's not something that exists on its own. It is He and His attributes are one. The world of Atzilut is united with God in a way that it does not have an independent identity. Whereas the world of Bria is already creation, is already something. What that something is a very subtle, indefinable maybe existence, but there is a sense of being distinct from the creators. This is also correlates with the level of intellect. So the intellectual Sefirot reside in this world, primarily the Sefirah Bina, which is, I think, the most prominent of the intellectual Sefirot. It's entirely intellect. Chokhmah is still related to higher, and Dat is related to lower. And the angels called Seraphim inhabit this world. This is also known as the upper Gan Eden Ha'Elyon, which talks about in the Zohar, the upper Gan Eden and the lower Gan Eden. So the upper Gan Eden is in the world of Bria, and the lower Gan Eden is in the world of Yetzirah. Yetzirah can literally mean formation. So that suggests that this yesh, this something that exists in Bria, now begins to take shape, has some kind of form to it, some kind of particular characteristics. In general terms, this world is lines up with the emotions. The angels are called Chayot, and it's the location of Lower Gan Eden. And then the lowest world is Asiyah. Asiyah is to do or completion, perfection, right? So this world is completed in its worldliness, right? It's completed in its sense of distance from God. So we can line this up also with the idea of application, right? So you have the intellect and you have the emotions, and then what are the results? What are the consequences of those emotions? How they apply maybe in thought, word, and deed. And the angels that are the Ophanim are said to inhabit this world. And then our world is called physical Asiyah, Asiyah Gashmit. So it's a level within Asiyah. So there's a spiritual component to this world as well. So our world is not the entirety of Asiyah. It is only one realm, one state of consciousness. But there are higher levels that are not. This has nothing to do with the Hubble telescope or anything like that. That's all Asiyah Gashmit. Okay. Each one of these worlds has 10 Sefirot in it. There are 10 Sefirot of the world of Atzilut. There are 10 Sefirot of the world of Bria, 10 Sefirot of the world of Yetzirah, and so forth. Each one is shaped, or the pattern, the system of each world is this system of 10 Sefirot. When we talk about God's attributes, when we talk about God's Chokhmah and God's Bina, we're usually talking about Atzilut. There's Atzilut, God and his attributes are one. In the lower world, we're talking about created Chokhmah, created Chesed, and so forth. All right. One last thought, not there are 2 slides here, but one last topic that we should cover before we sum it all up is the soul levels. So all this is talking about the Sefirot and the attributes of God. Now we're going to talk about the soul. Very briefly. So the Midrash says that the soul has 5 levels: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Here it says Yechidah and Chaya, although interestingly enough, when the Midrash then goes and explains what each one is, the order is Chaya and then Yechidah. So usually we talk about Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and then Chaya and Yechidah. In other words, in the Torah we find different terms that are used for the soul. The most common would be Nefesh, Ruach, or Neshama. Nefesh, I think, is often translated as soul, and Ruach as spirit, and Neshama as breath. But what really does this mean? In this Midrash, the Midrash explains what each one is in the style of the Midrash. But in terms of the way it's used in Chabad thought, the Nefesh is the lowest level of the soul, and generally speaking, correlates with thought, speech, and action. So that's when we're in that mode, that's what we're experiencing. Ruach is related to the emotions. Neshama is related to the intellect. Chaya is related to will. And Yichida is like the essence. And is united with God. Yichida means only, right? And it's also has a connotation of unified with God. In the prayers that we say on Sukkot, when we circle the bima, the lulav, and the etrog called the Hoshainot. So we have one of the Hoshainot that says Yichida liyachtach, that we have an only soul, and its whole purpose is to unify you, right? So we're at that level of soul. The idea is the unity with God. But as you can see, the lower levels all have some kind of description. They represent something: the will, the intellect, the emotions. Yechida is the essence. Yechida is the divine spark. Okay, so as you may have already thought and perceived, there is a correlation between all of these different schemes that we've been talking about. So we have the Sefirot, Keter, which consists of Arach and Atik and Arach. We have Chochmah, we have Bina, we have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, we have Malchut. And those then correlate to the Partzufim. So Chochmah is the Partzuf of Abba, Bina, the Partzuf of Ima, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Partzuf of Zeir and Pin, Malchut, the Partzuf of Nukva. And then they also correlate to the respective worlds. So Keter is more related to the realm of Ein Sof. This is not entirely precise, but it's a good beginning to think about it. Chochmah to the world of Atzilut. Atzilut is a world in which Chochmah is the dominant characteristic. Bria, Bina is dominant, and Yetzirah, the emotional attributes are dominant, and Asiyah Malchut is dominant. And likewise in the soul level, so Yichida corresponds to the Ein Sof, generally speaking, the transcendent levels, Chaya to Chochmah, Neshama to Bina or intellect, Ruach to emotions, Nefesh to practical down to earth. And then, of course, the letters of God's name. So in fact, in God's name, the letter Yud has a little thorn on the top. All the letters begin in the Torah, they begin with a little piece on top, right? A little curve on the top. It's called the thorn that points up to that which is ineffable. It's not a word, it's not a letter, it's just pointing. So that's the Ein Sof, the transcendent levels, and then the Yud to Chochmah, Abba, Atzilut, the upper Hay to Bina, Vav to the six Sefirot, and the lower Hay to Malchut. So that is overall. And we can come back to this when it's relevant to once again, bring up these ideas and explain them in the context of what we're talking about in the Tanya.